My name is Nichole Coyne. I am a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and I own a group practice in the state of Florida where I provide counseling services to individuals. And I also coach perfectionists and high achievers with helping them to lower the volume on their inner critic, lower their perfectionism, increase their self-awareness, reduce high functioning anxiety and imposter syndrome. And although I do a whole bunch of things with individuals in the coaching space, one of the things that I absolutely love is teaching all about the inner critic. I want to keep this as interactive as possible, so please ask questions in the chat box. Utilize that space, and I can follow up with all of your questions. I have never taught about the inner critic to a large group of people or outside of a one-to-one setting. And the reason for that being is that I like to provide a lot of individual support, because this can actually be something that's very specific to individuals in different capacities. So I'm going to do my best to give such a good overview of it. But what I'm also going to do is I'm also going to kind of niche into the different areas so that you can walk away with skills and tools to be able to start turning the volume down on this. Before I go into that, I want to talk about perfectionism, because this is really my niche area. This is the area that individuals with perfectionism have very, very, very loud inner critics. And what an inner critic is it's this internal narrative in our minds that we hear all the time. So what the inner critic is it's this internal narrative that we have in our minds, and everyone has this internal narrative. The narrative is primarily derived throughout our life from our earliest caregivers, as well as different situations and traumas or things that we've experienced in our life. Perfectionists have such a heightened inner critic. And what this looks like is hearing things like, you're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You're not taking good enough care of yourself. You should be doing more. Perfectionism is wanting to meet very high expectations despite negative consequences. And what that means is that perfectionism manifests within us when we are constantly trying to meet an expectation or a new level of something, and we can't live in this gray area. We can't live in this space where it actually stays calm and balanced and secure. Perfectionists overwork themselves all the time to try to meet the next highest level. If this sounds like you, some of the things that you typically do when you overwork a project, it's never quite perfect. You need to constantly be in charge of the way things are in order, and you want to make sure that you have control over situations, because the fear of not having control is what often leads us to feel very discombobulated and also just frustrated with the way things are happening. So as I start to go through these different parts of the inner critic, I really want you're welcome to take notes. I have a handout that goes with this that you guys will all receive too. But I really want you to think about how it's showing up for you. And take a second too to think about, you are in your mind every single day. You are hearing these thoughts. You are experiencing different types of experiences. And if I could, for just a second, I want you to step out of those thoughts and just maintain full present awareness with me, so you can start to hear these different areas and how they're starting to pop up for you. Because once you come into recognize and acknowledge how this is showing up, it can be one of the most powerful tools that you can have. Once you can see the different ways in which your brain is speaking to you, you will be able to shift anxiety, decision-making. It won't feel so much pressure on what you're doing. And you start to come away from this need to constantly do things to this recognition that sometimes we need to find that space and that balance. When you think about how you think, a lot of the times we assume that our thoughts are facts, and that is not true. Coming into recognizing that our thoughts are not facts is one of the most important elements that exists with exchanging and understanding. We can't be in control of everything that's going on, but we have to start choosing how we hear ourselves. So here's how the inner critic is broken up. It's broken up into 3 ways. And I want to show you this. So when I first started learning about the inner critic, there was actually somebody who said to me a couple years back, we were having a conversation, and they said, man, like that's what you think? Like you just think you have to keep running all the time and trying to stay on top of things, and that's really hard. Like, who's setting these expectations for you? And I was like, well, technically nobody, right? Like, I'm the person that's setting these expectations for myself. And in that moment, I had this realization that, oh, not everybody's brain thinks like this. Not everybody is constantly trying to high drive themselves and set these really unrealistic expectations. And I found this book. So this is The Happier Approach. It's by Nancy Jane Smith. It's not a terribly long read. And it's pretty good in terms of how it's broken down. So my model exists based off of what she has created and kind of converts into a way that, one, makes more sense for me, but also makes a lot more sense too for what I think high achievers and perfectionists and other individuals, how they hear themselves, how they actually mediate between those things. So the first part of the inner critic, we're going to break it up into 3 parts. The first part of the inner critic, and everybody has one of these, and it's different for how it shows up. It's called the Monger. The Monger, its entire job is to prevent you from failure. So I want you to almost think of a character in your head, but I want you to make this a character that is somewhat dark in nature, right? Someone who is not completely on your side and that really just wants you to keep working, keep overdriving, keep doing all the things. They're very good. The Monger is very good at pushing you to that next level. So think about you're running on a treadmill and there's a Monger standing behind you. This is your Monger. And they're like, you can go harder, you can go faster, you can go stronger. And this is what helps you to pick up the incline or pick up the speed on the treadmill. Same with working. Our Monger is that one that says, don't even get up to go use the restroom. You need to focus right now on this. And it's the most important thing that you have going on for you, which is really unhelpful, and I'll explain what there. But the Monger's job, being to prevent you from failure, also means overdriving you in every capacity of your life. And so what ends up happening is it comes off very critical if you're not doing the things that you want, that you think you should be doing. So if you haven't met that goal, if you haven't met that next destination, that Monger is sitting there and it's like, yep, told you so. This is that voice that makes you feel like a failure. That Monger typically has a lot of control if you're a perfectionist. It is very, very harsh to you. This part of the voice usually comes up for us too if we think about any time that we've had a previous past experience that was really embarrassing, or something that just didn't feel good, or something didn't work out. That Monger comes up and it constantly berates us into believing that we are not enough in some capacity. The Monger works to make us feel less than, and it doesn't provide us a lot of support. However, one disclosure here. The Monger does keep you safe in more physical situations. So I want you to think of hiking, right? Hiking is a great example. When we have a spatial awareness, which means like we can understand that we're going up on an elevation, we can kind of see like what's going on with us. It keeps us away from that cliff. And that is a good part of the Monger. That's the best part and the really solid part of the Monger. Most perfectionists believe that if they lose their Monger, they will also stop working as hard as they do. And that's not true at all. The volume needs to be turned down pretty significantly on the Monger. I'm going to teach you how to do this a little bit later, but we're going to go through the first 3 first. That Monger has to be turned down. And if it's helpful to you, think of a character, think of a person, name it. Name your Monger something, right? Maybe it's a name you don't like, maybe it's something along those lines, but give it some association so that you're able to delineate between the difference of this is the Monger and this is what is showing up, but this isn't me, because it's not you. It's not the script that you have to follow all the time. Okay, So now I'm going to move on to the second part of the inner critic. How's everybody doing? Any questions about the Monger at this point? No. Okay. The second part of the inner critic is that of the BFF, best friend forever, right? I want you to think of this friend that we've all had that really likes to have a good time. And you have either a big project at work the next day or a big test when you were in school. And this friend, and your test is on a Wednesday or your big project's on a Wednesday. And this friend calls Tuesday night and they're like, hey, it's buy one, get one margaritas at Chili's. Are we going? And you're like, I really can't. She or he is like, you've been studying, you've been doing all this stuff. Like, come on, you can just have one drink. We'll go out for a little bit. And so you agree. And when you're at the bar, you're kind of sitting there at Chili's or wherever you go. You're sitting there and you're like, yeah, one drink feels good. Kind of took the edge off, but it's buy one, get one. So let's have another one. This is exactly the definition of the BFF. And what ends up happening is the BFF leads us into procrastination and prevents us from getting a lot of things done, or it leads us down this really different space that looks like you need to just have fun and cut loose. She, he, however you identify your BFF, for all intents and purposes of this, I'm going to say she because mine's a she. She makes you feel like you are always right. You need to take time out for yourself. You don't have to worry about that thing. She wants you to procrastinate on every project that you're working on. Oh, it said my microphone just changed. Is there any sound change? Can you guys hear me okay? Thumbs up. Cool. Okay, thank you. The BFF. She makes you want to believe that it's not that important. Don't worry about it. She is procrastination station. She literally lives there. And the problem with her is that her and the Monger get into it all the time. They get into this disconnection, these fights, these arguments with the way that things are happening, because the Monger's pushing you forward and the BFF's like, yeah, we don't really need to do that. We don't need to worry about that. The best part of the BFF is that she does hold a lot of self-compassion. She is this voice, she, he, they are that voice that will sit with you and be like, it is okay for you to be taking parts of this time out. And they are also that one that helps you to do spontaneity and fun things. The BFF is really, really low with perfectionists when they go on vacation, right? In the beginning, for any of us that have like really intense jobs and we prepare to go on a vacation, we have to pull on the BFF. We need her to come with us. When we need to do something fun, we need the BFF to come with us, right? That BFF is supposed to let us let go of the Monger and just have fun. Vacations are meant to be fun. They're not meant to be thinking about work the whole time. So really paying attention to what that voice looks like. A lot of my perfectionists will tell me, I don't have a BFF. I've never had a BFF. I don't know what she looks like. But then when I bring up the level of procrastination that exists with that BFF, they go, oh, okay, I kind of get that. Because there is some goal, some event, some activity, something that you've been putting on the back burner for quite a significant amount of time that hasn't gotten done. And this BFF is just, you're putting gas on that. She just doesn't want you to do it at all. This is a part of all of us, right? The last voice is that of the advocate. Now, this is a much harder voice to describe in terms of its capacity. So the best way for me to give you information on that is to give you examples. The advocate's job is the mediating voice that needs to exist between the Monger and the BFF. It needs to come out and say, hey, this was tough, but this is what we need. Most individuals I work with, and when I start working with people individually for coaching or for therapy, they will tell me straight up, they're like, I do not know what an advocate voice sounds like. Think about somebody in your life who has constantly given you some of the highest levels of self-compassion and care and just positive regard. Just think of that person for a second. Keep them in your mind. Now think of your character. Think of the voice that you trust.
think of the person that brings you the most comfort in a lot of negative situations, or like, what is that? Is it a female? Is it a male? Like, what does that character actually look like, right? That is part of you building your advocate. The advocate works as a mediating voice. For instance, let's assume I don't work for myself and I have a big meeting at a big firm or something. And I go in there and my boss tears me to pieces. Like, I didn't get this project done because my BFF and I were chilling at Chili's the night before. My Monger is laughing in the background because they're like, I told you, like, you messed this up. I told you were going to fail and now you're doing it. And Monger's making me feel like crap, right? My boss is tearing me to shreds in this meeting in front of all of my colleagues. And I go, okay, this is the worst day I've ever had, and I'm probably going to get fired. I leave the meeting. And now I'm all anxious. I'm wound up. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with myself at all. The advocate's voice comes in and says, hey, Nichole, you need to stop for a second. That was a really tough meeting. You've been working really hard on this project. Maybe your boss is having a bad day. Maybe it's just a bad week. Maybe, the planets are in some kind of retrograde. Something's going on. You have to stop for a second. There's nothing you can do to change and go back to that situation, but you have to finish out the rest of your workday. And then we're probably going to take this afternoon and just work on ourselves, and we'll pull on the BFF to relax a little bit. That is what the advocate sounds like in our minds. It acknowledges the pain point of what's happened and goes, yep, that sucked. And then it says, what do we need following this? Really deciding and learning how to build on that advocate is one of the best things you could possibly do for your mental health. We assume that our thoughts are facts. And the problem with that is that when we're constantly assuming that our thoughts are facts, we are not actually hearing anything else around us, because all this anxiety that we're feeling is feeling true. It's feeling real. And there's a lot of different layers that this adds to, but that advocate is that new empowering voice. Some people have it in a really positive way, but most of the time, individuals never turn that volume fully up, because it's easier to lean into the monger a lot of the times and just say, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go keep working and this will keep my mind busy. Or they say, oh, the BFF, I'm going to go hang out with her and just enjoy a couple drinks this weekend and completely shut off and not worry about anything until Monday rolls around. It's easier to lean into those two. It's much harder to lean into the advocate. Those are the three voices. That is the inner critic broken up literally by one whole single definition. Please ask any questions you want in the chat box. I'm going to take a drink of water, but I do see that there's one question in there. So let's see what we got. Ooh, how to react when you hear this inner critic voice. So great question. When you start to notice that you are starting to hear your inner critic, right? You're going to start making little shifts. And the reason I brought up the one example about like you sitting at your desk and refusing to use the restroom until you finish this project is because a part of your critic is starting to exist in this capacity that's saying you don't deserve basic human rights, basic human needs until you get this thing done. When the advocate comes in, it starts to go, get up and go to the restroom. The project will be here in 2 seconds. It'll be okay. Take your time. It's not a requirement for you to harm yourself in some way in order for you to function or produce better work. It's just not. When we start to understand and hear and recognize these voices, well, first of all, you will start hearing these voices in other people now that you have this information before you'll start hearing it necessarily within yourselves. I'm sure each of you has been sitting there and kind of going like, oh yeah, that's kind of what my critic sounds like, or no, I don't know. And my BFF definitely have one of those, or definitely don't, right? We all have it. It's how we start to identify with these different areas. It's how we start to understand where they're coming from. And when they start to come up, we need to literally make that initial decision that says, okay, this isn't me. This is my critic, and she's being horrible right now. And what do I want to do with her or him? How do I want to manage this piece? So I'll give you this story. I have this amazing client that I've been working with for a long time. And when I first told her about the inner critic and I went through these definitions, One of the things that I like to add as one of the tips for lowering and turning down the inner critic is literally having you talk out loud to yourself. So in a safe place, start communicating with yourself, right? And this can just look like, this isn't me, this is my monger, and I need to calm down. I need to take time. This client and I were talking. We were in a session, we were kind of having a few moments, and I could hear her inner critic. It was so loud. And I said to her, I said, hey. I'm like, your inner critic is really loud. Do you know what that is? And she says, no. So I described it to her. And she says, well, what do I do with it? And I said, well, first I want you to start talking out loud to yourself. She's like, well, that sounds insane. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I get it. But here's the reality. The voice you trust the most is yours. The body hears what the mind is saying. And the voice that you can constantly rely on is that of your own. So when you can start to hear yourself say, hey, Nichole, take a second, calm down, regulate this, take a few minutes, like take this back. That is the voice that you trust more than anything. So she sends me an email later that weekend. And I told her, I said, make sure you're in a private space. Don't do this in the middle of Publix, when you're talking. And she says, I'm sitting in my car. It's parked. Don't worry. I have been talking out loud to myself and hearing the inner critic and realizing how mean and aggressive I have been to myself. And I am laughing hysterically right now because I wouldn't treat anyone like this in the entire world. And yet I'm treating myself this way. And that's the second part of this, is deciding if you're going to communicate with yourself this way. Would you do that to anybody else? And why is it necessary that you hold this so strongly towards you? Yes, you can absolutely be both a procrastinator and a perfectionist. Perfectionism and procrastination actually go hand in hand with each other. And a lot of that exists because we are so worried that we're not going to do things correctly that we prevent ourselves from doing absolutely anything. Procrastination also exists because we want it to be perfect. This is that monger. The monger pushes you to want to get that piece done, but then the BFF, that part of the critic, holds you back because it says, we don't really need to. And the monger is like, well, you got to get something done. Something has to happen. We're going to have a deadline. Something's got to occur here. Learning to recognize too, if you identify as a perfectionist, that you do not need to be 110% all of the time is such a powerful tool. We are not 100% every single day. We're not. No one is. Not even professional athletes, especially not professional athletes. They suffer injuries and things all the time. Coming in and leaning into this acceptance will help you to acknowledge that parts of you that are not doing really well need to take time out. And this is where we can pull on that BFF to say, today is the day that I actually need rest. Today is the day I need to step back. Today is the day that I don't need to overdo what I think I want to overdo. What if your inner critic is actually helping you? Feeling it's my internal motivator. You have answer part. Yeah. Okay. This is really common for perfectionists and high achievers. So I do a group coaching program twice a year for individuals who are experiencing burnout, imposter syndrome, high functioning anxiety, perfectionism, the whole thing. And in my last group, I was working with two amazing human beings. And both of them were under very strong impressions that their critic was driving them to that next level. And I said, okay, all right, fine. If that's what you are wanting to assume for a second, riddle me this, Batman. When have you felt like you didn't have something to do? And neither one of them could say yes to that, right? They both were like, I always have something to do. I'm like, I know. You're both perfectionists. You're both high achievers. You're both very qualified in everything you do. The problem is that the monger is not actually helping for you to achieve anything. The advocate is. The advocate is that one part of the critic that's not really identifiable as a critic because they're not harsh to you, that says, you need to work on this project little by little each day. But if you overdo this project, if you overwork it, it's going to show up that way. Our monger is not succeeding by allowing us to drive faster and further. And what it's actually doing is it's taking away for us to be in the present. And the present is really all you have. You don't have the future. I mean, it exists for everybody, but we don't know what's going to happen. And you can go into the past, but going too far into the past actually leads you into really dark spaces sometimes, or you start wondering, did I do things right? What did that sound like? How did that come off? All these different pieces. Your inner critic isn't your driver, you are. And that piece about bringing in new aspects of how you want to show up in your life by pulling on the advocate is really where you start to come into this new understanding that it doesn't have to be critical or harmful. It doesn't have to be brought on by teasing or blaming or criticism. Your world can be the way that you want it without beating yourself up to get there. One of the things that I think is really helpful to see with this kind of, is my critic helping me or not, right? I want you to think of working out. Like, let's just say for all intents and purposes, you want to lose 30 pounds in 30 days. Not a realistic goal at all. Not a realistic goal. The monger makes you feel horrible if you're not on top of that every single day, right? You come up with this whole workout plan, you're going to do this crazy, insane diet you've never done before, you're going to all these things going on. The monger is going to make you feel horrible if you're not fulfilling that every single day. The real thing about losing weight and making changes and physically sustaining is consistency, is showing up in areas that you can. What happens if you randomly get sick in the middle of the month? Are you allowed to still work out? Or are you going to experience all the shame that comes on with not being able to fulfill that standard? If you can start to pull away from this constant need of criticism and lean more into the present with the advocate by saying, yeah, that's not going to actually work for me as a diet plan. It's just not. I like ice cream. I don't eat ice cream anymore, but like if you like ice cream or cookies or something like that, then I want to be able to enjoy those things. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason to shame yourself for that. There's no reason to deny yourself some of those things, but it's all in moderation. It's all in how you see the construct. So what do you guys think? Any questions real quick? I'm going to check my little note thing here and make sure that I haven't missed it, but then I'm going to give you some more tips for helping to break your inner critic. Is it Patrice? Patrice. And when I'm hypercritical, I tell her nobody asked you, Patrice. I love this. That says, I recently named my inner critic. Her name is Patrice. And when I'm being hypercritical, I tell her nobody asked you, Patrice, which is How I Met Your Mother quote, which makes me laugh. This is the best thing about actually identifying a character as these voices. I have my clients a lot of the times when they're struggling with identifying the different areas of the inner critic, I have them tell me about the character because it seems more tangible in our minds to be able to tell us about somebody. Or I say, like, tell me the name of the person that you really didn't like in high school, right? Like, tell me somebody like that. When you can start to differentiate between those and really just draw on a character, it can be so helpful for you to separate yourself from needing to feel that you have to listen to the monger. I got to tell you guys too, the monger is one of the reasons that we experience so much anxiety. Feelings aren't hard. Our resistance to feelings is what is hard. Sorry, I said that a bit too fast. Feelings aren't hard. Our resistance to feelings is what makes them hard. It's what makes us believe that we are not allowed to feel sadness. We are not allowed to feel depression. We're not allowed to feel anxiety. We're not allowed to feel all these different things. When you can start naming what it is and deciding where you want to go with it, you can start making these huge shifts in the way that you see yourself. In recognizing that if I continue to treat myself really negatively, the only person that's suffering from that is me. And what you'll notice, especially within other people, is that other people will hear these parts that you have, right? They'll hear these parts of the insecurity, but they'll also hear how you're showing up in your mind. And that's not hugely helpful. It's kind of it's kind of sad to me too, because what happens with the inner critic is that we end up punishing ourselves. We punish ourselves for setting these internal expectations. And I'm super guilty of this. I'm going to give you an example why. So when I opened my private practice, I had left hospice in the middle of COVID, and I was just going to do full-time private practice. And I felt like I needed to make a beautiful, profitable business, which meant I needed to see a lot of clients, right? I needed to generate revenue, but I also needed to get my name out there. There's a lot of work. I mean, I'm the head of marketing, I'm the head of, finance. I'm the head of doing all these different things. And I am also the person that's giving the service. So it's very exhausting. I was with a group of therapists and we were all talking, and they asked me how many clients I was seeing a week. And I said, well, on average, I average anywhere between, 15 to 27 clients a week, depending, but I usually sit between that 17, 18. That's 17, 18 slots with not doing any of my paperwork or anything else, right? And all of them were like, what? You're doing what? Like, why are you seeing that many people? I'm like, what do you mean? What else do you do all day? Right? This is my job. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm like, that's a lot of people to be seeing. When I worked up in Massachusetts in a private practice, I was seeing quite a few people in private practice. And I could go a lot faster and a lot longer. But now I have to recognize that I actually need more space in my day, that there are times where you can actually separate yourself from what you're doing. And at work, taking a break and not having this monger be completely driven up all day into making you believe you need to do more in order to be worthy of something. That's not helpful. Really coming into the acknowledgement and the awareness that turning down parts of this inner critic is the real area to making positive shifts. That's the real goal. So a couple things. One, I want you to talk out loud to yourself in private, preferably. Don't do this in the middle of a grocery store. Help calm and regulate yourself. Hearing your own voice is going to be very, very powerful for you. Number two, I want you, when you're talking out loud to yourself, if you can't lower that critic, start saying all the things that you're thinking. Write them down, video record yourself. I don't care what it is, but find a way to be able to hear these voices. Decide in that moment if you would talk to anyone you love that way. Decide if you would shame, hurt, make them feel guilty, anybody, the way that you're talking to yourself. And in that moment, when you make that decision to decide that you're not going to talk to them, come up with the way that you want to talk to them. Pull on that advocate. Pull on that voice that says, listen, Nichole, this was a really long day and you got a lot going on, but you got to take it down a notch. You got to just pull yourself together, step away for a little bit, create some space, and then you can come back to dealing with whatever problem is going on in the moment. The other thing that I really want to push on you guys is working actively to start to hear these voices, to come into acknowledgement with them and not resist them. Just like feelings, a lot of the times we're constantly pushing feelings down very, very deeply because we're so scared that if we overfeel, then something bad will happen and that will be the end of it. How will we ever overcome it? Same with the inner critic. Having these really heavy, deep feelings about, having these really heavy, deep thoughts that are very self-critical and very judgmental, they're not serving you. They're actually making you feel worse. They're not motivating you to getting anything done. They're stopping you from feeling like you're accomplishing anything. They're pushing that goal further and further and further. Name your critic, name your monger, name your BFF, name who they are. One of my clients' BFFs named Tommy Boy, because he's kind of just all over the place, does whatever, has a good time. He's the life of the party. But he doesn't get a lot of things done. He's not there to be successful in what he's working on. He's there to have a good time and leave. Coming up with these really identifiable characters too for this inner critic can be very, very helpful for you. The other piece that I really want to push towards you guys, my husband is pretty well aware of this, but some days I will go to him and I will say, I can't hear anything but my inner critic right now. All I hear right now is my inner critic, and I need you to help pull me out of this in a way. Seek your support person. Number one, teach them about this or buy them this book so that they can learn in their own capacity. The names are a little bit different, but the overall principles are similar. And teach them about it and say, every once in a while, I need you to kind of help me pull me out of this. Having that support person that understands what the inner critic is and what it's doing to you and how much it's shaming you is one of the most powerful things that you will ever have. Having that person, that best friend that you can call and be like, I need you to just help me off the ledge right now because I feel like everything is going to fall apart. And having that person just kind of calm it down and say, hey, there's no reason to treat yourself this way. There's no reason to say this many negative things about yourself this way. Take a few minutes back. Everything's going to be okay. You are not a bad person. That is one of the areas that perfectionists sit in a lot, is feeling like a bad person. What does he say that helps you feel better? Do you tell him your thoughts? Oh, I absolutely tell him my thoughts, probably more than he wants to hear. So I will tell him flat out, I will say, I'm going to vent to you what I'm thinking, and then you tell me if I'm actually crazy or not, right? Because this is how we communicate. And one of the things that he'll always say to me initially is, your inner critic sounds really high right now. You're really shaming yourself. And you're really starting to amplify something. And in that moment, it just helps to remind me that that's not a part of me and it's not a requirement. It's not something that's necessary for my growth. It's not doing anything to help me move forward. It's actually stalling me out. It's like wearing a cement vest running uphill trying to do a race. That critic holds onto you as hard as it can. That Monger piece holds onto you as hard as it can, and it pulls back down. So when I hear him say that, when I hear him just pull me out just a little bit, I'll be like, all right, yeah, you're right. I don't need to be this mean to myself. And what it does is it helps to shift my confidence. It helps to remind me that, like, this is a bad day, but not a bad life. This is a bad day, but not a bad year. And that shift in and itself is just one of the most supportive things anybody can do for us, is coming to terms with that, coming to terms and understanding we need support in that moment. We need to have that compassion, because that's really how you build on your advocate. Your advocate is that mediating voice, remember? It's that person that comes in and says, hey, Nichole, what you doing, girl? Like, get up, go use the restroom, take your time, be a little bit more self-compassionate to yourself, and calm down. This does not require you to overdrive at this very moment. I hope that's helpful. Did you guys find that helpful? Find your person, find your ally for this, especially when starting to initially learn the voices of the inner critic. Having your partner understand where these things are coming from are really, really powerful and helpful areas. They can make us start to see ourselves in a completely different light. Talking out loud to yourself, spending some time understanding. If you guys like journaling, journal about all the areas that you are starting to notice. Your thoughts are not facts, and you have to disconnect that from the inner critic. You have to learn to recognize that that critic is always going to want you to do more, but you are a human being. You are present. We all are. We are all in this and just doing the best that we can with what we have. And it's not necessary to constantly make you feel overdriven and wound up about situations. This is the one thing that you could start to learn and implement immediately to shift down, to come out of these really critical and harsh things. This is all about judgment too, because the problem is that you're judging yourself, and it's not necessary. It's not a requirement for life. Judging yourself all the times is not the one thing that's actually helping you to get better at anything. It's just making you feel horrible. So that's kind of what I have. I do have one big announcement. My course is opening for Perfectionist Reset 2.0 tonight, and it's going to be on the sale price, on the pre-sale price. The way the course works is it's 6 weeks of content that is dripped to you week by week, because my perfectionists and overachievers like to get things done really fast, and that's not how this course works. It actually helps to increase self-compassion. I should have went into this a little bit more, but self-compassion is about you learning how to create balance and relax and be graceful towards yourself, like really giving yourself grace. It's compassion for you, right? So that's a lot of what this course teaches. And I go through the inner critic more in depth. I go through boundaries. I go through imposter syndrome, high functioning anxiety, productivity tools, tricks, hacks, all the fun stuff that I like to use and that I've used. I took my group coaching program and made it a self-driven course for individuals to be able to do on their own time, because perfectionists are really busy humans. And what this course, the reason I created it was to have people learn how to take care of themselves better and recognize that they don't have to constantly be driving 150 miles an hour. After this webinar, you are going to get a link to purchase the course, but I'm also going to drop it here in the chat box. Look at me, Sam. I recorded and I dropped the message. So if you, is that not clickable? Oh, of course it's not working. That would make sense, right? See here. I said something. That's why that did this. If you're interested in purchasing the course, this is the time to do it. The price is going to go up soon. The other cool part about the course is that you will get a free coaching session with me after you complete the course. And it has a bunch of chunks of information. It's all video recorded. You don't have to read a whole lot, which is really nice. And it only takes 1 hour a week to go through the content. And then I ask for 2 hours a week of you actively thinking about the content, doing some of the assignments that go along with it. It's filled with resources and worksheets and anything that you could possibly think of. I've probably put it in there. So thank you everybody so much for coming. I really appreciate your time this evening and you all being here. If you have any questions, have any follow-up, link didn't go to everyone. Okay, hold on. Can you help me with that? Can you drop the link for me? If you have any questions or any follow-up, or you have something more specific, just reach out to me. I think this is a big topic, and if you need more additional support or anything, let me know. I'm easy to get in touch with. You can catch me on Instagram or you can email me. Oh, thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. I hope you use these tools. Let me know if it was helpful.